Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, August 7th, 2018. Time for yet another show. Everything still proceeding as abnormal, I guess. Rounding up a number of stories for this morning. Everything seems to be on the up and up. Thanks, Justice, for the thumbs up all the way from the West Coast. Is it still dark? I guess the sun's up there, but only just barely. Thanks for getting up and making sure all the buttons are pressed, even if I don't remember to press all the buttons. Let's catch up on the various stories of the morning and, of course, the Twitter chatter. It is still dark. Okay, sorry to hear it. Just as well. I guess it's getting to be about that time of year. You're just going to have to head a little further north. Oh, you used to be further north. And a smoky morning. Again, also, your state is on fire. That's a big problem. You know what you ought to do? The problem is, you know what the problem is. The president told you. All these rivers, the water in these rivers are unnecessarily spilling into the ocean. If you put water on a fire, it goes out. Why aren't you doing it? Why don't you just invite the water to jump on the fire? Come on, river, hop in. We don't need you for anything. And besides which, we've been thinking about this for a long time. Human history, really, is the story of our attempting to convince rivers to simply do something different. It's not working great so far, but it is helping us illustrate his mental illness. I guess another point in that endeavor, I noticed this morning, Daniel Dale, I guess, I noticed this morning that yesterday morning he had this tidbit that he scooped up. Daniel Dale does a fantastic job documenting the lies from the enormous to the ridiculously small-minded, I guess you could say. Doesn't really matter the size or scope of the lie, but he loves to round up those stories and compile them, and he loves to get them. He gleans so many of them from Trump rallies. And this one, of no consequence whatsoever, except insofar as it illustrates Trump's continuing and degenerative mental illness. I guess one of the comments that he made along the way, the quote is here. He's telling the crowd once again, by the way, there's 1 million people outside who didn't get in. And I don't know if he blamed the fire marshal this time, but apparently the line transcripted was, and by the way, outside, if you want to go, we set up for the first time a tremendous movie screen. Because we have thousands and thousands of people outside that couldn't get in. So we have a big screen and big loudspeakers. I hope you're all happy out there. Of course, there was no one out there for the most part. But, the other story was the headline. Trump said people watched his rally on TVs outside the fairgrounds. They didn't. There were no massive TV screens, no jumbotrons outside of the Trump rally in Tampa. No danger, I guess, in getting caught on the spot because obviously people wouldn't be able to hear him outside, and then even if they did, they couldn't shout into the inside. Hey, everybody inside listening to Trump tell you that there are tremendous screens outside. There are no screens. It's a lie. It's all worse than Clinton, I guess, would be their measure for things. And besides which, we really wanted that to happen. The coal miners wanted the president to lie to people about whether or not there were screens outside. Clinton would have put screens outside, so our guy didn't. Aren't you owned, libs? There you go. I mean, of no consequence, but once again, what kind of person does that? It is evidence of one of two things. The most charitable explanation is that he thought it would be a good idea, and I suppose it wouldn't, I suppose it would be a good idea. If you really believed, for one thing, that people were unable to get into your venue. And I had seen something earlier that suggested that they switched venues to something smaller, that the advance crew knew that they couldn't fill the venue they had first booked And that looks bad on television. You want to get good imagery. And it's not unique to the Trump campaign at all that you control the size of the venue to make it look like you have a packed crowd. So I don't blame them for that too much, although it is interesting for the, Mr. Honesty, tell it like it is. I mean, you have to be an idiot, of course, to believe that that's what he's really all about at this point, and a willful idiot at that. But there are such people. And yet, of course, the old line about, there's people stuck outside. Millions more people would like to be here and see me because I'm so awesome. But they can't get in because reasons. So I suppose if you believe that's the case, you might think, it would be a nice thing. We should set up jumbotrons outside so that people can see and hear the rally and join in the fun. Now, that's a very difficult thing to do. I mean, it might not be difficult in the sense of let's say Panama Canal construction difficult. But it's not something you can snap your fingers and just say, a jumbotron should just be trucked out of storage because there's lots of jumbotrons lying around. But there are big screens that you can set up mobilely for events such as this. For instance, he probably saw such things in use at President Obama's inauguration and may have noticed that there were probably not very many, if any, such screens used at his own inauguration, though they may have set them up in anticipation of big crowds. But there are such things. It's just that, it takes some time. Normally, if you were to call and rent such a thing, they would not say, we'll be right over, and before your rally is done, we'll have it set up. It would be, what date do you need them for? Right now. We're closed right now, or no, or go away, or we're several million miles away from you, or whatever the excuse might be. I'm sure it was a good idea, and so I'm thinking that the most charitable excuse for this story is that he said, what we should do? We should set up those jumbo screens, those electronic screens. What do they call those jumbo electronic screens? And put them outside, and there should be sound so you can see it. It's like watching telly, and they can watch me on the. I love to put that little delicate tongue roll in a telly. They should be able to watch me and my beautiful, beautiful leathern face on telly outside of the arena. And it's a nice idea. So he probably demanded it. And maybe the first time he demanded it is people said, there's no time to do that now. I mean, maybe we could do that at a future rally. And maybe the second time as people demanded it, they said, we just, it's not that easy. And then he probably started to get infuriated. And so I don't know whether, maybe all in one, maybe it wasn't a progression, but I'm guessing that he insisted that there be such screens. And at some point, the staff learns you get away clean if you just say, we did that. We remembered you said that, or we anticipated you there, sir. We did it. There's huge screens. They're the biggest, the best, most beautiful, beautiful screens. Giant tellies are outside, and people are watching right now. And, like I say, it's a charitable interpretation in that, if you say I want to set up screens and people say we did set up screens, you're not going to go out there and check. But, of course, the big problem with this, even trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, is he's such a baby that they know already. You just tell him, and he's so, such a lout, so irresponsible, he's never going to check on anything. And if it were to be brought to his attention that it didn't happen, he would just say, my people lied to me, they're fired. So, he's happy with that outcome either way. So, I don't know. I just think, I guess it's probably worth spending a minute or two noting that they either were lying to him because he's such a baby and makes stupid demands, and they know, yes, Mr. President, it's going to be okay. There's going to be a jumbotron for you. All right. And that'll do the trick. It keeps him happy. And he goes in there. And by happy, I mean he goes in there and pretends he's furious and hates anybody with darker skin than what he's painted on his face. And they all have to get out of the country, and the crowd goes crazy. Yeah. No one can explain why the guy with the Blacks for Trump sign goes crazy, but he was already crazy when he got here. We know that. And that could have been it. Or the other explanation, which is he knows full well either there are no screens out there, or at the very least that no one's going to call him on it. And the most cynical being the people in here aren't going to go out to check, and the people who are out there aren't going to do anything. If they're out there, if they're still out there, they don't care. They're just passing by the venue. Nobody's trying to get in. And nobody's going to swap stories. And then even if they do, they're going to say, well, he probably was told that there were some out there. And so it's a lie he feels he can get away with. So he did, and he does get away with it, except for here on the show. But, what does that matter? Nothing's going to change. No one out there, I assume, listening to the show, thinking about voting for Trump in 2020. But that Jumbotron story, when he spoke Dutch to that little girl, whatever the revelation is, it's not going to happen on this show. Anyway, just, another example. To me, that's a huge example of his, deteriorating mental state, I think. But like I said, it's not such a big deal. You can live with it. We'll move on. There are a number of other things happening. Big story being circulated this morning. You're never going to guess. Wilbur Ross is corrupt. I know. It's a sad thing. There's the trombone. All right, so he's a grifter. He's a thief. We know that, but there's exciting new details of how disgusting he is, and that's always worth sharing. And I should remind you, he is not only a tremendous thief, he is a murderer, and he killed the Sago mine coal miners, which, as you know, is what the coal miners wanted. And for every coal miner you murder for lack of safety precautions, that's another coal mining job created. So, in Wilbur Ross's mind and Donald Trump's mind, that murder is a net positive to begin with. All right, this is getting a lot of treatment, a lot of eyebrows being raised. I don't know how you could have missed that Wilbur Ross was a thief and that he was going to be using this service in the administration to steal even more money, although that's not what the story is about. This is, I think, about his pre-government service grifting. But when the guy showed up to work, does he wear shoes? That's all I've seen. And you never see pictures of his feet anymore. But when he showed up first day of work, in like monogrammed slippers, I figured not a lot going to be happening here, with the exception of Wilbur Ross stealing, if not money, then at least a lifestyle from the taxpayers. This story, though, Dan Alexander and Forbes magazine. And it's from a while. Oh no, it isn't. I'm sorry. I'm looking at. I'm confused about the date. All the days at this end of the summer are melting together, and a lot of them are really melting because it's getting hotter. But it's brand new. What am I thinking? It's August 7th, 2018. For some reason, I thought August. That's last month. It feels that way. A new multi-million-dollar lawsuit has been quietly making its way through the New York State court system over the last 3 years. I added the word new, obviously. I don't know why I did. And the writer, Dan Alexander, would never say it was a new lawsuit. That has been 3 years in the making. That would be ridiculous. So my mistake. It's been working its way through the New York court systems over the last 3 years, pitting a private equity manager named David Storper. Not a terribly dumb name, but it's always fun to say Storper, for whatever reason, against his former boss. You'll never guess who it is. He's now Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross. There you have it. The pair worked side by side for more than a decade. Side by side. Gosh, that sounds terrific. Eventually, at the firm W.L. Ross and Company, where Storper later alleged Ross stole his interests in a private equity fund, transferred them to himself, then tried to cover it up with bogus paperwork. It's a very clever plan. Let me finish the paragraph here and then make a comment or two. 2 weeks ago, just before the start of a trial with $4 million on the line, that's nothing, Ross and Storper agreed to a confidential settlement whose existence has never been reported and whose terms remain a secret. That's why Ross did it. He didn't really want this story, but we've got it now. Anyway, I thought that was a very optimistic view of things for David Storper to say, we worked side by side. Me and Wilbur Ross, we were side by side. Yeah? Where'd you work? W.L. Ross and Company. Oh, I see. You were the and company. I get it. Side by side. And, of course, I assume that Ross's defense of this whole thing was, I didn't steal your interests in a private equity fund. It was a W.L. Ross and Company equity fund. I'm W.L. Ross. That equity fund is mine. You thought you were going to get paid for your work, and you did, a little bit. You thought you were going to get a bigger payday, and you're not, because I'm W.L. Ross. I take all the money. That's all there is to it. Anyway, it is difficult to imagine the possibility. No, it isn't. That a man like Ross, who Forbes magazine estimates, it's just Forbes, they don't say magazine, who Forbes estimates is worth some $700 million, and we know Forbes has been fooled before. It's difficult to imagine that he might steal a few million from one of his business partners. No, it isn't. That's what they do. Forbes is, of course, a magazine catering to the rich, and that means not saying that the rest of us all know that the rich steal money. That's what they do. So, I understand what they're trying to do here. It's just wrong. But okay. They think it's difficult to imagine the possibility that he would steal a few $1 million. What's a few million? Unless, that is, you have heard enough stories about Ross. Two former W.L. Ross colleagues remember the Commerce Secretary taking handfuls of Sweet and Low packets from a nearby restaurant so he didn't have to go out and buy some for himself. Well, for one thing, he was never going out and buying any for himself. I will say this. Another thing, look, underlying it all, there's an economic angle to it. Yes, I don't want to have to buy these things and, call it what you will. But that does also go along, it seems, with age. I think it's probably the fact that very regularly, normally you'll run into people of a certain age who realize, hey, I'm not out there working anymore. I'm depending on a pension, depending on Social Security, depending on my savings. What they like to, how they like to shout about it. I'm on a fixed income. I've always been kind of curious about that. I'm on a fixed income. We're all on a fixed income. I'm on a fixed income too. It needs to be fixed, this income. But if you're salaried, you're on a fixed income. And I guess the deal is, you'll never get a raise because you're on a pension. But you might get a raise if you're a salaried worker. The big news since you retired, Mr. Fixed Income, is no, you won't. Nobody's getting any raises. None that are effective anyway or outpace the increased cost of living. But okay, I get the point. I'm on a fixed income. And in many cases, that's a fairly serious limitation. And so I guess stealing Sweet and Low packets is a big part of your budget, let's say. Another observation here is that you could steal other stuff. Sweet and Low, that's an age marker too, quite honestly. My generation is stealing Splenda. So, that, like I said, it's a marker as between the generations. Okay, so Mr. Billionaire, why wouldn't he take $4 million if he steals Sweet and Low packets, right? And like I said, he's not going out and buying them. He's sending people out to do it. And he wanted to save himself the trouble of telling somebody else to buy Sweet and Low. One says workers at his house in the Hamptons, I guess Ross's, used to call the office claiming Ross had not paid them for their work. Wait a minute. So at his house, workers at Ross's house in the Hamptons used to call this guy at the office and say Ross hasn't paid them for their work. I think that's what's going on here. Another two people said Ross once pledged $1 million to charity that never paid. That sucks. But Donald Trump loves that one. A commerce official called these tales petty nonsense and added that Ross doesn't put sweetener in his coffee. Aha! Busted, except, there might be for someone else's coffee. I don't know what he's doing. And besides which, I believe it anyway. And I maybe don't believe the commerce official. There are bigger allegations. Phew. Over several months, in speaking with 21 people who know Ross, Forbes uncovered a pattern. Many of those who worked directly with him claim that Ross wrongly siphoned or outright stole a few million here and a few million there. Pretty soon it adds up. Huge amounts for most, but not necessarily for the Commerce Secretary. Of course, the reason he has so much money is he steals millions at a time, and so after a while, it's just for fun, I guess. At least if you consider them individually, these little grifts, $4 million at a time. But all told, these allegations, which sparked lawsuits, reimbursements, and an SEC fine, come to more than, here's the adding up part, come to more than $120 million. Even if half the accusations are legitimate, the current United States Secretary of Commerce, and remember, none of this is commerce, could rank among the biggest grifters in American history. Congratulations, sir. Not that he sees himself that way, and very rarely do rich people see themselves this way. The SEC has never initiated any enforcement action against me, Ross said in a statement, chugging dry, sweet and low out of the packet, failing to mention, of course, the $2.3 million fine that it levied against his firm in 2016. But not me, my firm, you see. The Commerce Secretary also noted that one lawsuit against him got dismissed without saying it is currently going through the appeals process. Ross confirmed settling 2 other cases, including the recent one against Storper, but declined to offer additional details. And then he stole our shoes that he asked us to take off before coming into his house. It's really ridiculous. Those who've done business with Ross generally tell a consistent story of a man obsessed with money, gee whiz, and untethered to facts. I don't know anyone like that. He'll push the edge of truthfulness and use whatever power he has to grab assets. Assets, I'm saying, says New York financier Asher Edelman. One of Ross's former colleagues is more direct. He's a pathological liar. How did these two get together? You know, him and Donald Trump. Wilbur Ross figured out at some point that money, or the aura of it, translates into power. Wow. Again, there couldn't be a more clear similarity. Forbes has previously documented how Ross seemingly lied to us over many years, launching himself onto and then higher on our billionaire rankings, at one point even lying about an apparent multi-billion-dollar transfer of 2 family members to explain why his financial disclosure report showed fewer assets than he claimed. What I don't want, Ross said, is for people to suddenly think that I've lost a lot of money when it's not true. Well, that's Donald Trump all over. You can see why they're friends. Or probably frenemies, really, if you take a closer look. Such machinations now seem pathetic. Now they seem pathetic. Before they seemed awesome. But his billionaire status was not lost on another person obsessed with his net worth. Donald Trump termed Ross a legendary Wall Street genius and named him to his cabinet. In these particular positions, Trump explained to a crowd of supporters, I just don't want a poor person. Ooh, boy. But that's what the coal miners wanted. From Ross's vantage point, Trump offered the perfect exit. The future cabinet secretary's private equity funds were underperforming, one on track to lose 26% of its initial value and another 2 dribbling out mediocre returns, and the accusations were starting to pile up. Roughly, this is the Wall Street genius, of course. Roughly 2 months before the 2016 presidential election, the SEC announced W.L. Ross was paying a fine and refunding $11.9 million it allegedly skimmed from its investors, including interest. The scheme was complex. Like other private equity firms, including several that coughed up money to the SEC around the same time, W.L. Ross derived much of its revenue from management fees charged to its investors. With funds as large as $4.1 billion, management fees of 1.5% could alone bring in more than $60 million a year for Ross's firm. Serious money. Even for somebody stealing just $4 million at a time, left and right, because he doesn't care about money. Remember also, by the way, I guess it would be a good time to remind everybody, I guess it would be a good time to remind the rally crowds that it was okay for all you poors to be voting for billionaires in a billionaire cabinet because my people are so rich they don't need to steal money. Okay, whatever. You can trust us. We don't need to steal. We don't need to. We're going to do it for you. We're going to be working for you. I don't even need a salary. But W.L. Ross promised that it would give its investors something like a rebate. For example, that's how they wiggled out of the SEC fine, I guess. For example, when Ross and his colleagues got certain fees for working on deals, they were supposed to give at least 50% of that money back to investors. But, according to SEC investigators, the firm gave back less than it suggested it would and pocketed the difference, leading the feds to conclude Ross's firm broke laws that prohibit defrauding and misleading clients. Okay. W.L. Ross paid the big settlement, but never admitted guilt. Gee whiz. According to the feds, W.L. Ross charged some of those inappropriate fees in the years before the Commerce Secretary sold his firm to Invesco for $100 million up front, and the possibility of another $275 million down the road. So, bad move for you, Invesco. Invesco investors, you need your money back. That meant that when Ross cashed out, he presumably did so at a bigger valuation than he deserved. In a statement, Ross suggested that Invesco never clawed any of that money back. The terms of the sale of my business in 2006 remain unchanged, he said. Invesco declined to comment. So either Invesco has been caught with its pants down here, and essentially he sold them the business, and I don't know whether he ever disclosed to them. But by the way, eventually the SEC is going to come and fine you, so the business is worth considerably less than you think. And it's going to cost you my fine, which I never paid. But either Invesco never found out about it, or more likely they said, no, you're going to have to give us that money back. And Ross was trapped, and so he did, and he refunded some of the money and then just lied and said, no, I really did make all that money. I'm still as rich as I said I was the other day, and please treat me accordingly. And I imagine that's probably what he did. We'll continue with this after a short break. Can you believe it? He's corrupt. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring, monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. We'll continue with the story of, you're never going to believe it, Wilbur Ross is corrupt. My goodness. Let's see. Some comments that came in along the way. Michael Mustin saying, yeah, Ross is of the opinion that the man suing him should be glad he wasn't trapped and killed inside a building collapse, which is what he usually does with people who think they owe him, think they are owed money, I suppose. So yeah, he's fortunate in that sense. Let's see. Oh, look at this. Parleo has a suggestion, a podcast episode. Which podcast is this one? Let's see. I'll have to click here. Trump Incorporated. Is that the name of the podcast? Oh, see, I can't get... All right, come on. Show me the tweet here. Check out this cool episode. iTunes is where it's located here. Trump Incorporated. I guess that's the name of it. Yep. From WNYC Studios in ProPublica. That does sound like a good one. The subject of this particular podcast, one about Trump and Ross, and I would check that. Ordinarily, in my normal life, I would check that out right now, but I'm broadcasting to you, and of course, if I played that along with you on the air, and we just listened to it, well, that would be terribly unfair to the ProPublica people, and a copyright violation as a result. But I should be able to claim. I don't know. I thought it was okay because Wilbur Ross does whatever the hell he wants, and I was just following his example. And that never works for, regular poor people. So, okay. Not going to happen. Let's see. Let's pick up the Forbes piece again. Where did that go on my computer again? Ah, yes, here it is. How long is this thing, by the way? I should scroll a little bit and check it out. It's good stuff. It doesn't change anything. It's just good fuel, Look, there's some there's a special election, as we know from hearing it from Greg yesterday. In Ohio, there's primaries today. Let this be motivation for you. The administration is a joke and a bad one and likely to kill you. So let's get rid of them. All right. So his claim is that the sale of the business, the terms of the sale remain unchanged. I'm still extremely rich. Well, we don't know what Wilbur Ross sounds like. He's spoken in the public in the past. He's not TV famous like Donald Trump. Well, there's more to the story. Well, I hope so, because you've typed a lot of words here. I can see that. According to 5 former W.L. Ross employees and investors, the firm was also charging its investors on money that it had lost. This is interesting. I love these stories because usually the real interesting stuff is the fees and various ways that the private equity funds find to charge clients money for doing nothing in particular. That's where the real financial genius lies. I mean, it's criminal, but it's still genius. They invent things. The finance industry is fantastic for this, and I love that they charge you. Like if you ask a question about your investment, you get charged a convenience fee for answering questions. Whatever the management fees, it really is pretty brilliant. And I was struck in picking our way through the Bain Capital stories during Mitt Romney's candidacy at how they had structured things. And it's to this point legal, and you question whether or not it should be, but ultimately the guiding principle in all this is I'm defrauding people, yes, but I'm defrauding rich people. And so maybe it's not so bad. And besides which, rich people are supposed to be sophisticated investors. I don't know why we assume that. They're, just as we all know that rich people are often very, very stupid, despite the fact that we're supposed to have learned that they're rich because they're smart, but they're very often not. And I guess that sort of morphs into, well, if they're rich, then they're sophisticated investors, and you don't have to look out as closely for sophisticated investors as you do about average folks, betting the nest egg on a mutual fund. And you got to watch the mutual funds more closely than these private equity situations. And besides which, on top of which, I guess rich people can stand to lose some money, $4 million or so at a time, let's say. And it's not a big deal. But they take advantage of that in fantastic ways, like give us your money and we'll invest it. And then, we're not doing this for free. We get management fees, and it doesn't matter whether we make money for you or lose money for you. We're doing work and we need to get paid, and a percentage of the value of what you've invested is how we determine what that is. That seems like a natural enough way to do it. And if everybody agrees and signs on the dotted line, there's nothing you can do to stop it. All right. Well, let's see. Moving forward here, we got the story of the business sale being unchanged. Yes, there we are. The 5 people that the firm that says the firm was also charging investors on money it had lost, and here's how it worked. If W.L. Ross made an investment of, say, $100 million that declined dramatically, in the final years of the fund, the firm was supposed to charge management fees on the actual value of the investment, not the $100 million starting point. However, W.L. Ross allegedly continued collecting fees on the amount invested, taking more than it deserved. I'm sorry. I don't know why that strikes me as so funny, except I know why it strikes me as funny. I just told you that, despite the fact that they're evil, these guys are geniuses. They come up with the most fantastical methodologies to charge as much money as possible, and they make it sound like it's legit. And, here's how it worked. And I'm getting ready for this fantastic, wow, I never even thought to try something like this. And all it is they just stole the money. I mean, here's the deal. When you invest $100 million with us, we charge you fees, and it's based on the $100 million figure that you put in. We take a percentage. Now, if we make X amount of money, then the fees will go up because we've done a great job to something else percent. But that would be fine because you'll still make money because your money has grown from $100 million to $200 million. But if we lose money, we still take fees because there's still work being done, and even that is questionable. But okay, that's what they say they're going to do. And but if we lose money, we will take a lower percentage or some lower amount of money to reflect the fact that unfortunately we've lost you money here, and it's only fair. If we're going to take more when we win, we should take less than when we lose, and that's sounds reasonable, so people sign on the dotted line. So here's the fantastic scheme. When they lose money, instead of taking less as they agreed, they simply take more, and see if you notice. And that's the brilliant scheme. And in a way, it's brilliant because, it plays on the psychology of these things. These things are, I'm sure, for a term of years, even if it's only a few years, 3, 5, whatever it is, and you invest your money with them. And most people, here's the other thing, the sophisticated investors, there's people who are rich because they're smart, you know how it goes, invest $100 million with you because they've got $100 million lying around. These people are too rich as it is. And you sign up and you begin getting your statements. And when you're excited about your new investment, you're reviewing your monthly statements, which perhaps get mailed to you each month, and you're looking and you're saying, well, we're not doing great. How much am I paying them in fees? Okay. And you look on the line and it says, I don't know, $25,000 in fees. And at first you probably are like, what? $25,000? That's so outrageous. But you're looking forward to making money. And so you're looking forward to the days where on net you'll be, paying them $35,000, but making $1 million a month or whatever it is. And you're looking forward to those days. And besides which, if I am only making, $20,000 a month because we're losing money, then I'll be paying them $5,000 a month, not $25,000 a month. So it'll all come out in the wash. And, the investment maybe isn't going all that well because, as it turns out, W.L. Ross is not that smart. He's not a genius Wall Street investor. He's just a dope who's worked out a way to take your money because, why would you let him take your money? You heard he had a famous name. He showed up to your meeting in slippers. Only a rich, smug bastard would do something like that. So he must be sure of himself and extremely rich. And so, great, here's my money. And that's really the extent of your sophisticated research. But it doesn't matter because you're rich and we regard you as sophisticated per se, so tough luck. And all he's doing here is saying, well, for the first year, I will bill you $25,000 a month. And then, because you're idle rich, you will get bored. Or even if you're active rich, particularly if you are active rich and you have lots and lots of investments going, you're reviewing hundreds, perhaps thousands of monthly statements, and you begin to forget how much I'm charging you and why. And at some point, maybe in year 2 or year 3, you get, the bug. Your eye is caught by the monthly statement coming in. You say, yeah, how's that W.L. Ross thing doing anyway? And you open it up and you're like, God damn, I've lost a lot of money. What? My God. Damn, look at this. I'm paying him $25,000 a month. Now, if you're really smart, then you're probably, if you're really smart, you're trying to run one of these things, even if you're not particularly good at investing. But if you're rich but kind of dumb and letting other people do the investment work for you, not like I'm doing my own investment work, I'm not doing any investment work. I'm on anybody else's behalf or my own or anything. I don't have it. So I'm not in this game. But if you're letting other people do your investment work, you're probably not paying that much attention to it. And you look and you say, damn, the $25,000. And it might occur to you, maybe. Wasn't I supposed to be getting charged less if he was doing crappy? But that was an agreement I signed like 2-3 years ago. Do I remember that? And most people don't. And they might say, damn, I thought that money was supposed to go down or something. And you're like, where's my last month's statement? Or where's another? I look up, where's my original one? Even if you're really smart. And you look at it and you're like, well, $25,000. That's what they've always been charging me. I guess that's just the right amount. And I think that's what they were counting on. They were hoping people would they were being billed this amount, and now they're still being billed that amount. And people, if they even look at their statements, they'll say, well, that's the same as last time. Nothing's changed. At least they're not billing me more. And they'll leave it at that. Or perhaps, I'm sure they have some line that if you call the company and complain, they might say, oh, no, that's not right. You actually, you're supposed to be paying this. But if you're smart and you're able to document the rest, then, I guess they try every roadblock they can. This is very much like calling your insurance, health insurance, right? And saying, well, I want to get coverage for, whatever procedure or whatever medication. And they say, no, that's not covered. And you say, but that specifically is covered. It's right here. No, it isn't. Well, I need to speak to your supervisor. The supervisor says, let me check on that. And then they come back and say, no, because XYZ. But that's a nonsensical explanation. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about here. And finally, you get to a certain point where they just say, all right, we're out of roadblocks. Fine, it's covered. And, they were hoping you would go away. And 9 times out of 10, people do go away, whether out of frustration or confusion. And they end up paying out of pocket when they don't have to. And that's a profit to the insurance companies. And, if the insurance companies were, interested in fairness, which obviously they're not, they would pay some sort of a bonus to the people whose job it is to throw those roadblocks in your way. And for everybody that they get to walk away from money that they're entitled to, they would get some percentage of that chunk of money that was left on the table. But instead, that's the bosses. They divide that up among themselves and then lay off anybody with enough experience at the front lines to possibly ask for a raise. That's how that game goes. And over at WL Ross, it's probably very much the same thing. You're not supposed to be charging me this much money in management fees if you have lost more than X percent of the value of my initial investment. No, that's not the way it works. Yes, it is. Back and forth, 2, 3 different people. Finally, you get to the level where somebody says, all right, this person is awake enough to sue us over this. Fine. You know what? I've checked into it, and you're absolutely right. I am so sorry. We had some new people handling the accounts, trainees, how it is with these guys. And I guess it just slipped by. They didn't notice. They didn't know what our initial agreement was. And I'll make sure it's rectified. And so, you change this month's invoice and send them a letter. Per our discussion, you pointed out that the amount charged was not correct. As a result, and because you're a valued customer, we are refunding you the difference for this month. Please excuse our mistake, and we'll make sure you're charged correctly going forward. And again, if you're not paying attention, you might not realize, okay, but they've been charging me too much for 11 months now. You're crediting me back 1 month. I need the other 10 months. And if you're on top of it and you call back, you'll get it, in the hopes that you won't initiate a class action lawsuit on behalf of everybody else who was similarly cheated. I don't know whether they throw you a bonus, or maybe they might say to you, you know what, to make it up to you, I'm going to let you in on one of our new investments. We got an IPO, yada, yada. Maybe it's worth something, maybe it's not. But they'll throw it to you in the hopes that you won't sue them. And I think that's the whole scheme. They put out there a fee structure that looks attractive, and then they just charge you something else. And if you notice, fine, here's your money back. And if you don't notice, I'm a Wall Street genius. Look at how rich I am. I must be a genius because look at how rich I am. But you're stealing the money. That's not genius. Sure it is. I'm stealing the money right in front of everybody from the richest, most sophisticated people in America, and nobody's doing anything. And if somebody catches up with me and the SEC says, no, that's absolutely not permitted. I've stolen $120 million this way, and the fine is $2.5 million. Am I a genius or am I not a genius? Well, certainly from the Donald Trump perspective, you're a genius. So that's the big scheme. Amazing. So the story continues here, though. It does say, however, W.L. Ross allegedly continued collecting fees on the amount invested, taking more than it deserved. W.L. Ross was allegedly even charging fees on one investment that was essentially worthless. When approached about the discrepancy, Wilbur Ross initially insisted his firm was calculating the fees correctly, according to someone familiar with those discussions. There are all sorts of fee issues, says an investor, but it was just the most egregious that I've ever seen. And I guess that's because it was just blatantly, we're just continuing to steal from you. So then there's a nice chart, by the way, of the various allegations and the timeline upon which they took place and what the status is for a total stolen, allegedly, of about $123 million. Continuing with the narrative here, Ross also allegedly skimmed money by serving on corporate boards of his firm's portfolio companies. Again, the rule was that a portion of the fees that W.L. Ross employees got for serving on such boards was essentially supposed to be handed back to the investors as rebates. Instead, Ross's firm did not give back enough, according to ex-colleagues. Ross, quote, was like a kid in a candy store, says one of his former employees. He pilfered it. And, saying Wilbur Ross, this ancient doddering figure, as a kid is a pretty big joke here. But once again, just to pause and dip into what this actually is, why would it be the case that Ross and other W.L. Ross employees who serve on corporate boards would be expected to rebate those, salaries, essentially, that they collected for serving on the boards? Why would they be expected to do that? I'm not certain that everyone would agree. But it would be the sort of arrangement that an actual sophisticated investor in a private equity fund would actually negotiate for themselves. So, for instance, why would Ross or W.L. Ross employees be on the boards of companies that his firm had invested in on behalf of the investors in his private equity fund? The private equity fund that he starts buys Toys R Us, let's say. Why would he be on the board? Well, now as a major investor in Toys R Us, the board of the company is interested in, one, keeping them happy, and two, keeping their money. And, as a major shareholder, if you buy 10% of the company or whatever, that's sort of one of the things they reward you with, is a seat on the board so that you can manage your investment more directly, et cetera, et cetera. And you're satisfied as an investor and you don't pull out and go somewhere else where they will offer you a seat on the board. Well, okay, that's fine. And as far as an individual investor investing his own money, if an individual buys 10% of Toys R Us will put that individual on the board, and the individual may or may not actually collect a salary for serving on the board. And that's the cushiest job in the world, as far as I can tell, is serving on corporate boards and being paid for it and going to a couple of board meetings a year and voting on stuff that doesn't really affect you. But if you're a deep thinker, you'll every once in a while think, firing people is actually a difficult decision. It weighs on me heavily. But that's why I get the big bucks. And firing them is why the bucks I get are even bigger. So I think I'll just go ahead and do it. But if you're investing your own money, then there's no question as to who should keep the salary for your service on the board. However, if you are there by virtue of your work for W.L. Ross, in other words, if you're there because the board of Toys R Us feels like it owes an investor, in this case an institutional investor, the private equity fund, a seat or two on the board by virtue of their having bought 10% of the company, that's fine. But remember that they bought 10% of the company with other people's money. They may be very rich themselves, but this was bought by the equity fund. The equity fund is a pool of other people's money, and they, the investors, because they're so sophisticated and smart, sometimes they are, will say, well, you're only collecting this $180,000 or what, I don't even know how much they pay for some of the big time board seats, but you're only collecting this salary because I loaned you guys my money to invest in Toys R Us. You didn't put up your money. That's not your salary. That money goes to the people who made it possible for you to sit on that board. split it up then among, and then the pushback among the employees and W.L. Ross himself is, yeah, but I'm the one that has to drag my butt from one block of Manhattan to another block of Manhattan in my limousine and sit there and vote on boring stuff like how many people to fire. Besides, that weighs on my conscience heavily. Okay, fine. So keep half the money for your service. The other half of the money, though, should be rebated to the investors. That's how it works. Another great scheme, therefore, that Ross comes up with is, okay, I'll give back half of the money. P.S. to his administrative assistant, give back 10% of the money and keep the other 40%. Okay, I'll do that, boss, because they have no idea or won't check or won't look into monthly statements or won't be able to figure out the financial statements. Too complicated, crosses several companies, maybe dozens of companies. They'll never figure it out. Somebody eventually sat down and did the forensics and figured it out, but in the meantime, he just stole that money. That was the brilliant plan. Wow. Ross is now attempting to distance himself from the management fee issues. No regulatory agency has ever asserted such charges or any other charges against me, and there is no basis for any such allegations, he said in a statement. 8 former employees and investors, however, said Ross presumably knew about the issues. And former W.L. Ross employees add that the costs were far greater than the $14.2 million announced by the Securities and Exchange Commission. A 2015 annual report for Invesco, W.L. Ross's parent company, disclosed that the company had paid another $43 million over the last 2 years in reimbursements and regulatory expenses connected to its private equity business. Secretary Ross has largely avoided scrutiny around those payments because the report does not explicitly tie them to his former firm. 4 former employees who worked there, however, told Forbes that $43 million was connected to W.L. Ross. Oh well. With the investors' claims apparently behind him, Ross now faces a lineup of allegations from his former colleagues who say he robbed them of money as well. I thought they were supposed to be sophisticated. Damn it, we hired these people because they were smart. Such accusations are nothing new for Ross. In 2005, former W.L. Ross Vice Chairman Peter Lusk sued the future Commerce Secretary for $20 million, ultimately alleging that he had tried to cut him out of his interests. The executives reached a settlement in 2007, which former W.L. Ross employees say cost roughly $10 million. Cost of doing business for Ross, right? Asked to comment on the suit, Ross responded, "The Lusk case ended with mutual confidentiality requirements. Therefore, I tell you nothing." 3 years ago, Storper launched what became a $4 million lawsuit against both his former employer, W.L. Ross, and former boss, the Commerce Secretary himself, alleging that Ross stole his interests. Attorneys for Ross admitted in court filings that one of his companies took Storper's interest and reallocated part of it to the Commerce Secretary. It's without more details. I mean, basically, I guess they had some kind of a contract to manage something, and let's say W.L. Ross gets 50% of the fees and Storper gets 50% of the fees, but Ross directs the W.L. Ross administrative staff to send 75% to Ross and 25% to Storper. And I guess what we read earlier was that there were some forged documents. And I guess, boss, what are we going to do? Storper's not an idiot. He's going to come in here and he's going to say, I was supposed to get 50%. And he's going to show us the contract. And we can go through the usual song and dance and say, no, you misunderstand it. No, there was this complication, that complication. That works for the chumps, the investors, but it's not going to work for him. Well, here's what you do. Take the contract, copy it, white out where it says 50-50 and write in 75-25, and then we'll say that's the contract. But he has a copy of the contract. This says 50-50. Well, we'll say his is the forgery. You think that'll work? No, but give it a try. And I don't know really what they did. And I say that's too idiotic to possibly be true. But then again, I went into the explanation of the management fees thinking that just stealing it and just not giving people their money or just charging them too much when the contract says this is what the amount is supposed to be. We can't forge all of those contracts. We don't know where they are. We don't know how many of them there are, etc. So we'll just do it, and if we get caught, we get caught. But with this guy, there's one contract. Let's change it. I mean, that's awfully stupid, but so's the first scheme. So maybe they did it. Attorneys for Ross admitted in court filings that one of his companies took Storper's interest and reallocated part of it to the Commerce Secretary. But Ross's lawyers also insisted all of that was allowed under internal agreements. Simply put, they wrote, this lawsuit is a personal vendetta against Mr. Ross. After a judge rejected attempts to prevent the case from going to trial, just days before the jury selections started, the two sides agreed to settle. So we don't have great information about what happened because it's confidential. But they might not even have gone as far as whiting out the contract. They just said, oh, well, there's another internal agreement that wasn't written down that says we can do that. Well, contracts law, basically, the way you learn it in law school, which is never the way it really is in real life, says, well, unless there's reference to that in our original contract or there's something in writing, these verbal contracts don't work. Well, we're sophisticated investors and we do things in sophisticated ways, including making stuff up as we go along. Well, I guess that could happen. I mean, look how dumb this other thing was, says the judge. And he says, I can't decide just based on how stupid that sounds whether or not you're right. So I guess let's start the trial. At which point Ross says, well, let's not start the trial. And let's see if we can come to some kind of settlement and keep it all secret. That's a good strategy, too. I guess that one worked. When we come back, we'll read the paragraph that explains that what makes this all more than just a typical he said, she said dispute. I'd like to know what it is that they think that makes this dispute so sophisticated, and maybe I won't be disappointed this time. But our first hour being up, it will be time, I think, pretty shortly afterward to move on from this one and on to the rest of the news of the day. We'll be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Maybe I should come up with a new thing to say when I come back out of there, but I don't know. I guess it's the basics. It's reality. I don't know why I would come up with something else. I was distracted over the very short break by the tweet of Chris Geidner, who tells us that the Daily Caller has written another embarrassing story. Can you believe it? Of course, that's what they do. So I shouldn't have been that interested in it, but there was a nice screen capture here, and they have tweeted out. I guess they're trying to. They think they caught the New York Times making a stupid mistake. It's weird. New York Times makes up a new abbreviation for the state of Maine, it says, and their illustration here is from a story in the New York Times, I guess, that says women have won primaries in 9 states. 4 could be their state's first female governors. And they are speaking about Kristi Noem in South Dakota, Stacey Abrams in Georgia, South Dakota, of course, abbreviated here SD, S.D., which, if you go with the postal code abbreviation, you can eliminate the 2 periods, SD, okay. Georgia, correctly abbreviated GA. Paulette Jordan, no abbreviation whatsoever. They simply type out Idaho. And Janet Mills of Maine, abbreviated ME. Now, M, capital M, lowercase e, period. And the Daily Caller is fairly certain that they're certain enough that they're going with the screamer of a tweet headline. New York Times makes up new abbreviations for the state of Maine, ME, which is, of course, the correct abbreviation for the state of Maine. Now, why they abbreviated Maine, M-A-I-N-E, but typed out Idaho, I-D-A-H-O, 5 letters, why not? And I guess maybe it had to do just typographically, looking at the thing here. Janet Mills has fewer letters in her name than Paulette Jordan does, and the Idaho centers nicely under the longer name of Paulette Jordan, whereas the typed out M-A-I-N-E doesn't center quite as nicely and compactly under the name Janet Mills. That was probably the decision. Again, they decided not to go with the postal abbreviation, capital M, capital E, and no periods needed. So maybe that confused them. I don't know. Or maybe they just don't know what the abbreviation for Maine is. But then if you didn't, why bother? And what did you think it was? And it's not M-A, why is Maine M-E? Well, there is an E in there, but it can't be M-A because that's Massachusetts. It can't be M-I because that's Michigan. It can't be M-N because that's Minnesota. So what's left? The E. I mean, I think that's actually why they didn't give Maine M-A and Massachusetts something else. It can't be M-S because of Mississippi, but it could have been M-C or something, or M-H, I guess they could have gone with. But I don't know. I don't know what order they assign these things in. But my assumption is that when they got around to Maine, and they should have started at the top and then worked their way down. But I don't know what they did. But then what letters are available to us? We're using M-A, we're using M-I, we're using M-N. Guess E it is, Maine. I don't think that they gave it that much thought at the Daily Caller. And neither should we be giving it this much thought either. I just thought it was kind of funny that they would go out of their way to call them out as having made a mistake. And, 2 seconds to Google the abbreviation of Maine? A lot less time than I spent talking about why the abbreviation of Maine is M-E. Anyway, back to the Wilbur Ross story just to finish things up. But before we do that, we might as well take note of the comments that have come in during the last segment of this story. Michael Musson commenting cleverly enough, don't forget to take the extra fee because we had to take so many fees. And really, it's about that point. There's so many calculations that need to be done. We had to hire a mathematician, and so mathematics fee is now added on top of all this. I wouldn't doubt that gets done from time to time. Or the bigger your statement, the more paper we had to use, and so therefore we charge you more as well. And Ideologue D, our D. Gordon Liddy, always very funny, also pointing out quite correctly, Wilbur Ross really embraced rational self-interest. It's immoral not to steal in this case. And I think you got the mindset exactly right. Okay, look at this. I have to put this one aside for my college hunting son. William and Mary students ranked happiest in the nation, according to a new report from the Princeton Review. And I'm sure that they're embarrassed over there at Princeton that the Princeton students aren't the happiest. But I'll put that aside. One of the colleges we visited and that he would consider, although it did really seem like it's an interesting story that they're the happiest in the nation, because those were some of the most intense students we came across in any of our college visits. They really kept their noses to the grindstone, as far as we could tell, and continue, I assume, to keep them there. And, they were pretty intense people, and that's good, and they make for great students, and I'm sure great employees once they graduate, unless they go on to graduate school, which probably most of them do, and then they don't know what to do with their lives after they graduate there. But, I guess studying makes them happy, and so it's a happy match there. Well done, William and Mary. Okay, back to Wilbur Ross, though. Let's see, where do we leave off? Yes, we wanted to find out what is it about this stupid arrangement that makes it more than just a he said, she said situation. He said he was entitled to 50% of the deal. And we said, no, there was a verbal agreement where that could be changed, and we did change it, and it's 75-25. Well, what makes it all more than a typical he said, she said dispute is the number of similar complaints against Ross. In other words, I guess the only thing that makes it really different is that it's he said and then 17 she's said the opposite. Why those people who say the opposite are she's, I don't know. There's plenty of he said disputes out there. Not to mention she said disputes, and probably disputes among, animals and humans, animal-human hybrids, members of the plant kingdom, things we don't know about out there. So we really need to come up with some new terminology. A third former W.L. Ross employee, Joseph Mullen, filed a $3.6 million lawsuit in December of 2016, an exciting time for W.L. Ross, saying W.L. Ross funds, quote, looted his interests, quote, for the personal benefit of Wilbur L. Ross Jr., which is him, I guess. That means there's a W.L. Ross Sr. Out there, although I assume he's long buried. I mean, given the fact that W.L. Ross Jr. frankly looks long buried himself, but is very much alive. Well, alive. I don't know how much I would stick by very much. Anyway, so Joseph Mullen is alleging $3.6 million looted from his interest for the personal benefit of Wilbur Ross himself, and that they attempted to conceal their misconduct through opaque and misleading tax statements and disclosures. A New York State court dismissed that case in February on technical grounds, saying Mullen, who left W.L. Ross in 2007, waited too long to file it. He's now appealing. And this happens from time to time. Well, the statute of limitations on the particular crime you're alleging here, or tort in this case, I guess, has expired. Although I guess he could be claiming a crime. You're past the statute of limitations. And then you can have on appeal arguments about whether or not the statute of limitations was tolled, as they say in law school, T-O-L-L-E-D, like you paid a toll in a way. You're tolling the statute basically puts it on pause. If the allegedly guilty party here does something that would obstruct your ability to discover the fraud in timely enough fashion to file your suit before the expiration of the statute of limitations, then it can be argued that the statute is tolled or put on pause during the duration of that obstruction, and that might give you enough time then to file your suit after all, and there'll be a big argument about whether or not that thing that was alleged is provable and should be considered to have tolled the statute. That's what the appeal is likely about. Storper and two other former high-ranking executives at W.L. Ross filed yet another lawsuit against the Commerce Secretary in November, alleging that he and his firm charged at least $48 million of improper fees and then pocketed the money. So, terrific. Kindred spirits with everybody else, like all the fun people over at, where was it that was doing this? Not Western Union. Wells Fargo, the other one with the with the Western theme, the Stagecoach. Yes, okay. Although that one was at least arguably a clever scheme that we read about so many months ago. But okay, improperly pocketing improperly charged fees, another fairly dumb and unsophisticated ripoff. It was a slow siphoning rather than a one-time heist, according to the suit. That's the way most of them think they'll get away with it. Private equity firms typically collect management fees, those 1.5% charges, only from their outside clients. But the lawsuit, I don't know what exactly that means. We'll see if we can find out. But the lawsuit alleges that Ross and his firm seemingly charged current and former company executives as well. So if you are working for the company and you put money into the private equity fund, I guess you're not supposed to be charged that 1.5% charge because, of course, it is a management fee and your money is being managed, but you're the one managing it. So why should you have to pay yourself? But then again, what's the difference? Because it's coming back to you. So I don't even know if I will waive that. And I guess it's something you can do for good clients who stick with you through several funds. You know, you're already invested with us. We can waive or lower your charges. But I guess though they agreed to do that, they just charged them anyway, probably under the same theory that they never started charging the lower fees when they lost money for people. Most of them won't notice. So they describe it here as saying it would be like a restaurant owner telling his employees that they can eat for free while taking the meal money out of their paychecks. In a statement to Forbes, Ross called the case without merit. He moved to dismiss it in February, but the suit remains active. So I guess it has some merit, because if it didn't, then the judge would have agreed and dismissed it. Interesting. And by the way, the scheme of telling restaurant employees they can eat for free, but then taking the meal money out of their paychecks, it reminds me very much of, I guess, the paid leave proposal that's floating around the Trump administration and some of the ranks of Republican members of Congress, suggesting, well, we can have paid leave in this country if we set it up such that here's all you have to do is you take the paid leave and we borrow out of your Social Security fund and you'll collect less in Social Security later on by the amount that you took in paid leave when you needed it. Will that work out? And of course, the answer is, well, I mean, it might cover the bills for the moment, but it's not paid leave. That's not paid. I didn't get paid. I borrowed money from myself to pay for the leave. I was doing that anyway. That's called unpaid leave. I mean, that's some scheme there. That one is also that's at least a little bit more sophisticated. There are probably a lot of people who won't recognize right off the bat that they're being sold a bill of goods. You're borrowing from yourself, and the money you put aside for yourself for the future is being used to pay your expenses while you're on leave. That's what you're doing now. That's unpaid leave. But because, I don't know, there's something sophisticated sounding to it, and politicians that, for whatever reason, some people trust are saying it, they think it's a real thing, and they never really catch on. All right. A look at old versions of W.L. Ross's website reveal the magnitude of the turmoil. How so? Well, of the top 7 firm leaders listed on the 2006 website, none of them have the same roles today. Ross is now leading the Commerce Department. Wendy Teramoto serves as his chief of staff, and Stephen Toy is the new co-head of W.L. Ross, which doesn't really speak to anything in particular. But meanwhile, the majority of the top 7 leaders, including Storper, Mullen, David Wax, and Pamela Wilson, are all actively waging legal battles against their former boss, Wilbur Ross. That's not as impressive as it sounded in the beginning. Of the top 7 leaders, half of them are suing Wilbur Ross, and the other half, essentially 7, so it's split 4-3. The other half are either Wilbur Ross or still working for Wilbur Ross, and so who knows. But still, it's an inequitable split, no doubt. In a presidential cabinet plagued by ethical problems, it can be easy to forget about Wilbur Ross. Most of the attention tends to center around the obvious abuses, like Scott Pruitt getting a $43,000 soundproof booth in his office, or Tom Price wasting $341,000 on jet travel. He did that so quickly, too. It was amazing. But while Ross's antics are more complicated, they involve far more money. They just don't involve taxpayer money, and I guess that makes it somehow less sexy, too. On November 1st, 2017, Ross signed a sworn document attesting that he had divested all the assets he promised he would. That was not true. Also not true of the president, right? The Commerce Secretary, in fact, still owned somewhere between $10 and $50 million worth of stock in W.L. Ross's parent company, Invesco. Ross sold his shares a month later, banking at least $1.2 million more than he would have if he sold in May, when he initially promised to divest. By falsely claiming he'd gotten rid of the shares earlier, Ross also put himself in legal jeopardy, another phrase that's been bouncing around on Twitter the last couple of days, except about Donald Trump Jr., not Wilbur. But Ross also put himself in legal jeopardy since it is a crime to lie to federal officials, more or less. Representatives for Ross, a sophisticated investor, in case you didn't know, it says it right here, claimed the Commerce Secretary did not lie, but instead failed to realize he owned the shares. Ooh, I forgot. Look what I found in the couch. $50 million worth of stock in the company to which I sold my company. I think I would remember them. Ross also said he did not know that he had a $73,000 stake in a company named Air Lease, which he finally sold in June, more than a year after he promised he would. And he admitted to shorting stock of Sun Bank Corp, saying he hoped to cancel out an interest he mistakenly thought he owed, but in fact did not. Owned, rather, but in fact, that's interesting. So how did that go again? He shorted Sun Bank Corp, saying he hoped to cancel out an interest he mistakenly thought he owned, but in fact did not. So he declared it, and it was wrong. But all right, very interesting. For any head of a private equity firm that I know of, including like Carlyle's David Rubenstein or Blackstone's Stephen Schwartzman, these guys know what they own. It's their whole business. It's their whole life, says an investor in W.L. Ross's funds, terming the Commerce Secretary's explanation ridiculous. And it is. A top official in the Federal Office of Government Ethics, which is worth nothing now these days, scolded Ross in a letter last month, saying that his failure to divest corroded public trust. Oh no. According to the letter, another ethics official searched Ross's calendars to see if the Commerce Secretary broke the law by taking actions to benefit his personal holdings, finding no evidence that he had. One day later, however, Forbes revealed that Ross had previously dined in the White House with the CEO of a business in which the Commerce Secretary secretly held an interest. After the report, Senator John Thune, a Republican from South Dakota, which is abbreviated SD, by the way, asked the Inspector General of the Commerce Department to take a second look, which could be abbreviated SL, by the way. Thune is not the only senator, or OS, making noises about Ross's finances, RF. All right, I'll stop. In June, 2 senators and a congressman asked the Securities and Exchange Commission, which really is abbreviated SEC, I'm not kidding, to launch an insider trading investigation of Ross, based on revelations that Ross shorted at least $100,000 in Putin-linked Navigator holdings. Wow. I think we actually read about that once. Soon after being told about a forthcoming expose on his connection to the company. The the trade seemingly bolstered Ross's wallet by $3,000 to $10,000, makes the blunder that much more vexing. I see. Okay, well, he only netted an additional profit of $3,000 to $10,000 on the sale of $100,000 in Navigator Holdings stock. 14 Democratic congressmen have also called on the Inspector General to investigate Ross's potential conflicts of interest. After assuring senators during his confirmation hearing that he would be overly cautious on ethical matters, Ross spent the majority of his first year in office as a business partner to the Chinese government while he negotiated U.S.-China trade relations. He also waited to get rid of a stake in a Cypriot bank reportedly tied up in the Robert Mueller investigation. And he took months to divest an interest in a foreign car parts manufacturer whose industry he is now investigating. The central matter in all of Ross's legal issues is his own credibility. Lying on an ethics disclosure form to Congress and Senate committees and falsely reporting compliance with an ethics plan is neither commonplace nor part of the accepted rough and tumble world of politics. David Storper, Ross's former right-hand man, argued in a court filing. They are just lies. Adds another one-time colleague, this is a public servant who can't tell the truth. Well, gee whiz, we've got plenty of those to go around, no doubt, but that's where it lies, and that's where Wilbur Ross lies, basically, everywhere he goes. And where Wilbur Ross Sr. lies, we do not know, but that he lies somewhere is beyond a doubt. Okay, well, now we're caught up on all the cheating that Wilbur Ross has been doing, and I think we guessed from a long time ago. I mean, once we found out who was being touted for the job and we realized exactly who we were dealing with, I don't think anybody really thought that we were going to get, an honest broker as Commerce Secretary. And of course, once the name Wilbur Ross came up, not really sure why anybody would have guessed that we were going to do any better than we got out of Trump. Okay. Moving on, let's see. Other comments came in. Gideon just saying, I don't know, I must have been kidding at some point. Trump is not Mr. Honesty. Not sure where you're getting that. No, he's not. I know. Let's see. Not sure it says anything about his mental state. I know. Well, nobody's really sure, but I'm kind of sure. Can we get back to politics at some point? Okay. He's tired of the Wilbur Ross. Well, Wilbur Ross is the Commerce Secretary. It is politics, of course. Now, I know this is interesting. Gideon is particularly interested, by the way, in the Dean Heller Senate race in Nevada. And I'm not certain that I've got any additional information for you on that. But I know this is like the second or third question you've asked on background, just about how does this affect the Heller race and why, for instance, if Trump is so wildly unpopular, or why, if getting rid of the Affordable Care Act is so wildly unpopular, why isn't Dean Heller distancing himself, you asked the other day, from Donald Trump if he's, a sinking ship? if he's so controversial. And I think the only answer I was able to give to you, I don't know Dean Heller personally, obviously, and I haven't really followed that race all that closely, except to know that most people think he's been in trouble, and the Republican senator seeking re-election who's in the most trouble of all of them for the longest amount of time. And it was a close race the first time for him, and it's been polling close the whole way. And Nevada has a significant voting population of Democrats, and it's Harry Reid's home state, and he's still got a machine that operates there. Why wouldn't Heller, though, in that case, distance himself from Trump if he thought it would help him politically? And the only answer I was able to offer to Gideon, and maybe some of you have some suggestions, let's crowdsource this answer. We can ask Greg what he thinks about this stuff and see whether Joan has some opinions on this. Maybe Armando, maybe you listening have an opinion about it and you actually know what you're talking about. And you can certainly share it with us, and let's see if we can't exchange ideas on this one. But my guess was Dean Heller is as much a politician who runs the campaign in a box as anybody. He really doesn't bring anything in particular to the table as a politician, and he was running his campaign straight out of the box the first time around and has ever since. Donald Trump, of course, is now the box. That's all there is in the box. There's nothing else left in it. There was very little in it in the first place. It's been emptied out and has been hollow for quite some time. And Donald Trump is essentially taking the place of the box, or is perhaps providing the only contents of the box. And not with any substance either. There's nothing to run on except basically to say, I will do what Donald Trump says we ought to do, and that's my position. I don't have really thoughts of my own. There's nothing left in the box. Why would you pledge yourself to something like that, especially if you had a brain in your head and thought Donald Trump was an idiot or whatever? And the answer is Donald Trump is fully in control of what goes on in terms of political strategy. He's, I don't mean to say he's in control of anything. What I really mean is it's fairly clear to people running that even if they were to somehow eke out a win and remain in office, Donald Trump's main interest and the use to which he's putting his political machinery, the RNC, whatever, informal lines of control throughout the Republican Party, is he will make a point of punishing Republicans who don't toe the line with him. If you distance yourself from him, he will punish you. He will attack you. He'll sick his fans on you. He'll make your life miserable on Twitter. Not that that actually means anything in real life, but what does happen in real life is he will cut you out of deals. He will make sure that important projects that you want for your state don't happen, or that if they do happen, you're not invited to the ribbon cutting that goes along with it. These are not things that are normal. These are not things that presidents ordinarily concern themselves with as much as they might want to stick it to somebody. They realize, the weight, the gravity of the office demands the opposite, and that you look gracious even when you don't think the people who are attending the opening ceremony with you, if you're there for whatever reason, deserve to be there with you. And you can find small and subtle ways of stabbing them in the back, but Donald Trump is overt about it. I don't know what the value of winning re-election to the Senate is as a Republican if Donald Trump has it in for you. I don't think it's going to be a particularly pleasant 6 years, but it is going to be 6 years. I guess there's possibility that you outlast Trump himself, but I don't know. Heller, not really a long-time politician, not really an institutionalist, no particular love exhibited for the Senate. So the idea of a rough and tumble campaign to win the opportunity to hang on possibly 2 years past the term of Donald Trump to continue serving in his beloved Senate, just not on his radar. It might be different, I think, for other candidates in other places, but that's my supposition. And again, I just don't know enough about Heller and the particulars of his race and how he views Donald Trump, et cetera, but Anyway, I thought I'd offer that up anyway, just so that we could have a little bit more politics content for Gideon. And I'm sure that he's not the only one waiting for us to get back to some other stuff. But, corruption, it's a big part of our picture here, and it's becoming an increasing part as less and less actual politics are happening in America and more corruption takes its place. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Little fight with the mute button on there, holding us up just a bit. But let's move on to a couple other subjects. There's nothing dominating the news that I was able to pick up on in my usual morning survey of Twitter, though I was intrigued by this story, obviously, and thought I would point it out. And there are a couple other things that we might throw in there just by way of news roundup. I'm holding on to a couple of stories out of the Middle East and thinking I might sew together a piece for Friday where we might pre-record the show on Friday as we take kids on emergency dental visits, etc. But a big Middle Eastern themed show that I tried to put together during my break while I was in Iceland, becoming relevant again, and so the material will not be lost. And there's new angles to the story to add, including yesterday's news as between Canada and Saudi Arabia. So our Canadian friends will be glad that we're paying some attention to what's going on up there. Armando, though, ringing in for just a moment. Hey, how you doing? What's on your mind today?
Nothing. I just.
Oh, okay.
I actually had sent you a couple messages, but I realized you couldn't read them. But
too many
then
screens.
I thought you mentioned me and
yes,
to help with something. Was it?
Oh, just
politics.
Wondering what was going on, and I think I was asked. Oh,
day.
Dean Heller
I don't know
was.
If you covered that part of what's happening today.
Yeah.
We
did with Greg yesterday. He previewed all of what was going on, and I think everybody is more or less up to speed on it. But I think one thing that I wanted to remind everybody of was that Chris Kobach, I guess, stands poised, at least according to the Daily Kos elections folks, to upset the incumbent Republican governor in the primary, which is an amazing thing all by itself. But considering how corrupt we've now found Chris Kobach to be, I guess that makes him perfect for winning the Republican primary in Kansas. And it will, I assume, hand Trump a win since he has endorsed him and has long endorsed him, even though both of them are idiots. But we'll see. It would have been a great thing to have, been able to shove in his face to have him lose the primary today. And I guess anything's possible, but doesn't look like that's the case.
I'm of a different mindset.
Yeah?
I do think it's pretty interesting. This is somewhat politically related, so
sure,
I think it might satisfy Gideon at least. One of the things I think is interesting is post-primary.
Yeah.
How can the Republicans who need to move away from Trump do it? I think when you have Kobach and he's got a candidate in the Michigan, I think senator race to run against Stabenow, a guy named John James. I know nothing about him, but I figure if Trump endorsed him, he must be horrible.
Very likely. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm just saying very likely he's horrible, as you said.
And to get to the larger point I was trying to make, so, okay, you get through these primaries, and there are look, they're not going to be – I don't think they're going to be stabbing out with anybody, but I would think
not.
that a Trump candidate would have a worse chance. Kobach, from what I understand, actually improves Democrats' chances of winning the Kansas governorship. So it's actually
one of those.
a mixed, it's a double-edged sword because Kobach could be the governor, but then maybe you can beat him in Kansas.
Yeah.
So,
as you know, always a dangerous gamble.
Yeah, exactly.
But I guess if you're looking for silver linings, and he happens to win.
At any rate, it is what it is. But then you've got a bunch of see, we're not actually. There's no races now at this point in time that you can really judge the Trump effect. If Trump is endorsing, first of all, presidents generally don't endorse in primaries, almost never. I know that FDR in '38 did it, and it didn't work out for him. But by and large, they just don't.
It's not normal,
right? So you don't really know what a presidential endorsement would normally do in a race because they don't do it normally. But you would think, all right, well, he's the head of our party, he's the president.
Right.
You'd figure that the president would win most races he endorses and can swing him. If most of the primary elections, people don't know as much about these candidates as you think they do. Most voters don't know much of anything, to be honest with you. I know that's a terrible thing to say, but it's true. And so,
they're busy with their lives,
right? So the president's for him, so I guess I'll be for that guy.
That does happen.
And normally a president won't endorse some wacko, but of course, when the president's a wacko, he'll endorse all the wackos.
Yes, and. Yeah, and sometimes he just endorses, I guess even after the fact. But like with Luther Strange, he endorsed in the primary mostly because, like most voters, he didn't know anything about what was going on there. And somebody just told him, here's the guy. Yeah.
It wasn't a real endorsement. It's like, I'm told that this is the guy I'm supposed to endorse. And it came off just that way.
Right. And then he didn't even want to do it. He even said right in the announcement, I don't even know why I'm doing this, basically.
Right at the rally.
I want Roy Moore.
I'm not sure why I'm for you, but vote for him.
Right. So, okay. So it's not always the most valuable endorsement.
Right. No, and it is not particularly, I think it's not valuable in competitive districts and competitive state races. I'll give you an example of one race I'm following closely. A Florida governor, DeSantis, is going to beat this fellow Putnam, who is establishment Republican for 20 years. He's basically been, building his resume to this day to be able to run for governor. And then this guy DeSantis went full bore Trump, and Trump is all in for him, and he's going to win that primary. But we think, and I'm full disclosure, I'm for a candidate in Florida governor's primary named Gwen Graham. Yes, she is the daughter of Bob Graham, and I think we have a heck of a shot at beating DeSantis. Putnam would have been toss-up race most likely. I think we would be a slight favorite over DeSantis. We'll see, but I do think that there's a larger tone, in my view, for Republican candidates. Let me give you something I know, which is a Florida effect. So DeSantis is going to be full on Trump, and Trump's going to come and campaign in Florida, I guarantee you. Mm-hmm. And then a fellow like, say, Carlos Curbelo, who is a Cuban-American Republican who has fought on immigration and really tried to distance himself from Trump, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So here he comes. His state race is going to be filled with Trump. In his district, that's going to really be a problem for him. That's a district where we have a good shot of winning, and the more Trump there is, the better shot we have. It also goes to the point, if he runs away from Trump, does Trump voters vote for him? Do they come out for him in his district? And if he can't really embrace the top of the ticket, and the top of the ticket is going to depress Republican vote in his district, it's going to help us there to hopefully flip that seat. And I think that's a national phenomenon.
All right. Yeah, the particular race that he was interested in is Dean Heller's. I'm not certain why That is, but it is. So, okay, it's a
it's an
concern.
important race for us if we're going to take the Senate. I will say there's a similar pattern because Heller, as you know, basically was an establishment Republican who tried to portray himself as moderate, even tried distancing from Trump on DACA and other things, but then he ended up going full-bore Trumpster in his way, and he's going to have this Laxalt on top, who Laxalt turned into a Trumpster. Trump endorsed him. So in Nevada, it's going to be a Trump race again. Jackie Rosen is going to run against Trump, and Heller is going to have a hard time walking away from Trump. So that's actually not a bad example of what I'm talking about, how Trump having, impact in primaries actually hurts swing state, swing district Republicans in November. And Heller, I think, is not a bad example of that. Now, the polling is close right now, but, that's to be expected. It's a very tight state, that Harry Reid was from Nevada. He's won there before. Heller won 6 years ago, I think. Obama's won Nevada. Hillary won Nevada. In 2004, I believe Bush won Nevada, but don't quote me on that. I don't know right off the top of my head. It's just a tough, close state. It's got, a true purple hue, unlike Florida, which has a Republican lead. People like to say it's a complete swing state, but it isn't. On the presidential, it's very close. It's always very close. In the governor's races, it's always very close. But the congressional races, it's a gerrymandered state. So we lose a lot there, but the state government is all Republican. We haven't had a Democratic governor in Florida for 20 years, not since Lawton Childs beat Jeb Bush in 1994, was the last statewide race we won. And this also puts another part of that picture. I'm not talking about Heller, but Rick Scott, the current Florida governor, is running against our incumbent, Bill Nelson. I'll be perfectly frank. Nelson's campaign's been a little bit lackluster, but from what I understand, their feeling is they're hoarding all their money and messaging for the period just before, because Scott's stole hundreds of millions of dollars from Medicare over the years, and that's how he funds his races. He's worth $400 or $500 million. As I said, mostly stolen from Medicare. Yes. I'm not kidding. Right. He took the fifth 100 times on Medicare fraud, and he's the governor. But at any rate, Scott has a Trump issue too. Trump actually is underwater in Florida by about 5 points on approval, disapprove. I think that the Trump voter that surged, which was white, no college in Florida, that actually probably cost us the state, and the exurbs and the Panhandle are not reliable voters. I'd be interested to see how Scott plays that. And Scott and Graham Graham is going to be the top of the ticket. Bob Graham is still a popular name in Florida. He was a governor for many years and senator for many years. And I know this is contrary to everything you hear about races nationally, but Florida's a different breed of cat altogether, and that is not being for Medicare for all is actually a good position politically. I understand. I'm not going to get into the substance of it, but it doesn't help you in Florida. And the Graham name is, frankly, synonymous with moderation. Bill Nelson is synonymous with moderation, and I know that a lot of people don't like that, but that's a message that will likely win. Decency, sensible, even boring, will be a fairly good message in a statewide race this year in Florida, and I think that's what we're going with. Maybe it'll fail, but I think it's going to work.
Oh, okay. Dice have to be rolled in one way or another.
Well, yeah, you got to make a pick, and in fact, the voters will pick. Everyone's been able to run their races in the primaries. We have two rich billionaires on the primary ballot have thrown tons of their own money in it. The perennial Jeff Green, who's a real scumbag, to be honest with you, but some people like him. Phil Levine's good. He's a Miami Beach mayor, but I don't know that he's that effective as a statewide candidate. The up-and-coming Andrew Gillum, who's 38, has been the mayor of Tallahassee for a few years. He's a great future. This isn't the race for him, in my view, and I think the voters are going to end up agreeing with me on that. So we've rolled our dice, and I think the voters are going to pick boring. But I don't think she's boring, but I know that that's the pejorative. But I think that competent, sensible, moderate is going to be a winning message in the fall. But we will see. I actually was first sending you messages, and I don't know if you want to talk about something else, and if you do, I'll hang up and go away. But I was at Netroots Nation. I wanted to just give you a quick
that would be great.
rundown of it.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I mean, that's a good shift. Brian Monroe actually just sent me a Time magazine piece about, reported from out of Netroots Nation. So if we don't get to that today, I'll include that later in the week. Let me hear it from you, though. You were there.
I was there. I saw the prospective candidates for president. I thought Harris gave a great speech. I don't know if you recall, but in 2017, I raved about Elizabeth Warren's speech. I didn't think her speech this year was as effective. I thought Kamala Harris's speech was very effective. Cory Booker is Cory Booker. It wasn't the best Cory Booker, but he was fine.
Okay. I think it's described here as a monologue from a Shakespeare production, a college Shakespeare production. Right.
I will tell you one thing that might interest people who have followed this story with us, which is the question of superdelegates and caucuses and all that, from the Unity Reform Commission and all that.
Right.
Okay. Well, anyway, it was supposed to be a Unity Reform Commission panel with Namaki Konst and Jeff Weaver and basically the Bernie band. They canceled all of them. They never showed up.
Oh.
But we had an impromptu with our good friend Chris Reeves, who's been a guest on the show.
Okay.
And Christine Pelosi, who filled in and very graciously agreed to do a Q&A with the people who were there, and there was about 100 of us there, of all stripes.
Did you find out when you got there that the original panelists, is that when you found out they weren't coming?
Yes, that's when we found out.
Oh. Okay.
It was not handled well in that sense by the panelists.
No.
I think the people who organized the conference were blindsided, to be honest with you.
It sounds like it.
But I can't be the source on that because I don't know that to be true. Just my take.
A source familiar with the conference says,
I was at the conference, but I don't run it.
No,
I don't know
just familiar with the conference. I've heard of it. That's enough.
Right, and I was at the event. I know they didn't show up, and no one told us why.
Interesting.
They just weren't there, so I don't know that they knew. But Christine Pelosi and our friend Chris Reeves filled in and gave us the update. Now, they on August 28th, I believe, or thereabouts, the DNC is having a full member conference in Chicago.
Okay.
Where they're going to vote on these proposals.
Well, all right. Like for the 95th time.
So, just so you know, the superdelegate proposal, which you, of course, have argued against very eloquently, is going to be on the table. And what it is that superdelegates do not count on the first ballot. But they can vote in subsequent ballots. They hold all the other powers of a convention delegate. Otherwise, they vote on platform and every other thing that convention delegates vote on.
Yeah, I mean it's not a terrible compromise. That doesn't bother me at all. I didn't think it was. I think people demonized superdelegate status in ways that are unwarranted. But all right, you want to get rid of them or change the rules. This sounds like an okay rule.
It wasn't the top of my list because the superdelegates have never changed the result of the pledged delegate count ever.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that it mattered, but they cared about it.
Yeah.
I said, well, listen, I understand, and I think as a matter of principle, it would be terrible if the pledged delegate vote was overturned by the superdelegates.
Yes.
So even in theory, I don't like the idea. I'm very much about voting, trusting the voters. And in fact, that's why I hate caucuses.
Right.
And I've been railing about the fact that the rule that was supposed to be implemented was blocked by the Bernie stance. And I was going to fight about that with them there in person. And it would have been probably quite a spectacle and shouting. But we avoided that and had a very reasonable discussion with Christine Pelosi, who I also think is wrong on the corporate money argument. We're in the Citizens United world, blocking the DNC from taking what. And by the way, how do you define corporate money anyway? I think all that's a mess. But anyway, we talked about that. We talked about the fact that the superdelegate vote is going up in Chicago with the rule. One of the interesting things, and you might be interested in this, is what's the procedure? Generally, when you change the charter of the DNC, it's a 2/3 vote.
Yeah, okay.
And the question was this going to be a change of the charter or something else that only requires a majority vote of 50 plus 1?
Yeah, good question.
And Chris Reeves very adroitly maneuvered it that it's a 50 plus 1. The RBC has agreed that it's a 50 plus 1 by a vote of 28-1. And what ends up happening is, to overturn the RBC's ruling, you know what happens. Just like in the Senate.
Okay.
They take it to a vote, and guess what the margin of victory will be for that? 50 plus 1.
Yeah. Wow. All right.
So it's basically going to be 50 plus 1, because I would assume if you're against the thing, I don't expect there to be principled votes. Well, I do see it as a 50 plus 1 vote, even though I'm against it. There's not going to be Joe Lieberman voting against the filibuster and then voting for the bankruptcy reform bill. None of that. I assume it's going to be an up and down vote, and either they'll they'll line up the votes or they won't. There'll be a lot of coverage of that, a lot of controversy about it. I assume that'll be the top story coming out of Chicago. I think it's only a perception issue. I don't think it's an actual, real, honest to goodness issue. I never did. But again, if it makes them happy, that's fine. On the caucus front, I've lost. I lost as a rules battle on that. Nobody cares. The state parties want to control their own thing, which is nonsense. Well, why don't they get to control their superdelegates then? I mean, there's no rhyme or reason to anybody's arguments on this, and that's why I hate it. It's all very results-oriented. I honest to goodness tell you, David, I am for more voters having the say, whatever that proposal is. I really am, and I don't know how it turns out. In theory, I'm an establishment corporate dem. I should be for superdelegates, right? But I'm not.
Yes.
Because I'm for voters. But caucuses are anti-voter. They're for voter suppression, and they will not adopt the rule. And Chris was saying, well, look, they're already changing it. They changed it in Idaho. We expect Nebraska will change to a primary. We already changed it in Colorado and Minnesota and Maine. And he's right. Yes. All that is true. But they could change it back. At the same time, the point is there should be a rule. And we still don't know what the biggest prize out there is going to do, which is Washington State, which controls about 80 delegates, which is, 5 times Nebraska, 6 times Idaho, 4 times Maine. It's not right. There should have been a rule. So, but practically speaking, they say, and Chris seems pretty confident, that all the people who have primaries available to them, that would be Washington, and have used caucuses in the past, specifically that the 3 holdouts were Washington State, Idaho, and Nebraska, he thinks they're all going to fall in line.
That may be so.
And I guess that'll be fine.
Yeah, I mean, if you get to your result, I guess it's okay. And then, of course, at the point at which you arrive at that result, you might find a few years down the road more openness towards a rule because, well, why not have this rule? We're all primary states now anyway.
Well, and I got to tell you,
incrementalism.
Pelosi shut me up pretty well when I said, why haven't we gotten this rule? And she said, well, we don't have the votes for it.
That's the way it goes with those rules.
And what do I say to that? I mean, I said, well, we should.
And you may, after a long-term campaign, and sustained campaign.
What if the superdelegate rule doesn't have the votes? Well, then, everyone will march out and say rigged and whatever else they say. I don't get to say that because I believe in the process. And if I get outvoted, I got outvoted. What can I do? Mm-hmm. I got to keep trying to get people to agree with me and to vote with me. That's all. It's like a primary.
Yeah. Or, you could short circuit it. If you had enough people behind your organization, you could start claiming that the vote against having a vote on this was rigging. And if enough people believed it, then you would find that there are people with sensitivities who say, I don't necessarily believe that this reform is necessary with respect to, say, superdelegates, but I do recognize what the backlash against adopting this new rule will be. And it's another round of screaming about rigged and corporate Democrats, and I can't stand it anymore. Fine. We'll get rid of the superdelegates. And if you could I suppose if you create that level of problem and that level of frustration one day, you'll get your rule too. Or you do it the long-term way and realize that there really is no argument to be made against inclusion when it comes to opening up the franchise, and that eventually all of these states that have the option available to them will become primary states, and then the rule will become that much easier to pass later on.
Well, I do think our pressure has caused a lot of these states to abandon their caucuses. I think that if Washington State does, it's going to be because a lot of us raised the ruckus. And hopefully they'll see that, listen, let's make it easy for you so no one can argue about you. Just let it, if there's a primary available, you do it. That's all there is to it. But we'll see. We maybe want to skirmish, but the war continues, I suppose.
These things take time.
I know we're up against the clock, and I know you probably have some closing thoughts. That's the upshot of Netroots Nation for me. It's a short thing. If you wanted to, I am going to write about it this weekend.
Yes, we'll look forward to that.
So if you look for something on Sunday, if you want more detail.
Okay. In fact, one last thing that I guess we'll use that last minute on, a comment that came in, and I'm not certain whether this has held up as well as people were hoping for, but a comment from Boo Radley on Twitter says, the great overlooked story in Florida is the Puerto Rican vote. Hundreds of thousands of Puerto Ricans have come to Florida after the storm, and they are all American citizens ready to vote and hate Trump. But I'm hearing less and less about the actual impact of their having landed, and
I think are
they ready to roll?
From a plus 20,000 to a plus 40,000 effect for Floridians. It'll be important in the districts there are. It could, listen, if it's super duper close, it could be the difference. It's a good thing for Democrats. It's certainly not a negative thing. But the impact is slightly overstated. People were talking about 300,000 votes. It's not going to be that.
Okay. Yeah, I do hear, latest reports on people maybe being a little bit underwhelmed with respect to their previous expectations about both the number of Puerto Ricans on the ground and ready and committed to voting, as well as the number of, newly registered young voters brought out post-Parkland, and the numbers aren't necessarily...
It's nice. Every little bit helps.
Yes.
It adds up to
no doubt about
20,
that.
30, 40,000 extra votes. And, there'll be close races. Statewide, it's probably the impact is a little lessened. But, there are particular districts it could help here and there. And listen, it all helps. The knocking on doors gets you a few things.
That's
but
absolutely
anyway,
right.
I hear the noise. I hear the music, so I'm done.
All right. Thanks very much, Armando. We appreciate your chiming in on this and helping us out through the end of the show and for your unique insight in Florida. This is not to say, by the way, either in the case of the Puerto Ricans or the newly registered young voters motivated by the activists of Parkland. But, it's the same old story, essentially, of voter registration drives or turning points or game changers. When they are stretched out over the long term, sometimes they don't measure up to all that they were cracked up to be at the beginning, but not because of any underperformance of the people looking to organize, but because of the overstretching the expectations in the heat of the moment, let's say. And then maybe we've overestimated these things, but these things are valuable, worthy, and may yet change the outcome of elections, and you should absolutely not change your mind with respect to their value with an election coming up. That's not the intent. Anyway, time for us to wrap things up and hand things over to Justice on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and let's see if we can cram in a few comments about what you might hear later on. How can John Bolton, for instance, know Trump was not a beneficiary of Russian cyber warfare in 2016? How can John Bolton or anyone know anything about Trump?
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
More coming up here. Construction companies are buying ads on Fox News to hit Trump on the infrastructure bill he promised. A for-profit prison company threatens an anti-ICE group with a lawsuit for statements made by an 8-year-old girl telling the world what they do. And Wells Fargo again, apologizing after hundreds of customers lost their homes to foreclosures due to computer glitches.